The turkey made her vomit. Bile and steam, knees buckling, hands shaking, she dropped to the floor as 20 pounds of roast thundered into a room that had been counting the minutes until the ovens. Tangy, Cadbury, Glenn Miller on a gramophone, rosemary and butter, smells she hadn't tasted since Hamburg when her mother burned in the cellar. They'd lived on grey porridge and fear of execution, and yet Scottish women were handing out chocolate, lipstick, and dance cards. Why were villagers feeding and dancing with the German POW nurses instead of punishing them? The ovens had been running since dawn. Nurse Margareta Waldheim pressed her spine against the wooden wall of Barrack No. 4, counting the minutes between each roar of flame from across the camp yard. 30 seconds, 28, 32. The sound rolled across the frozen Scottish mud like distant artillery, each burst feeding the certainty that had settled over the 37 German women like a burial shroud. They were going to die today. It was December 24th, 1945, 6 months since surrender. Margaret hadn't eaten in 2 days. None of them had touched the grey porridge the guards shoved through the door. Why waste food on corpses? The British were just being efficient, same as they'd been in Dresden, in Hamburg, in Berlin. The ovens were ready. The only question was which of them would go first. Frida Kellerman sat cross-legged near the stove, lips moving in silent prayer. She'd stopped crying around midnight. Bärbel Schroeder, youngest of them at 23, had vomited twice already. Thin, watery bile that froze in puddles on the floor. Katharina Brandt, the half-blind surgical nurse who navigated by touch and memory, kept her hands folded in her lap, perfectly still. The oven roared again. "They're making room," someone whispered in German. Margaret closed her eyes. She'd survived 2 years in field hospitals, survived the collapse of the Eastern Front, survived the chaos of surrender when Russian soldiers hunted nurses like trophies. She'd survived because she'd been smart, because she'd been careful, because she'd learned to make herself small and invisible and useful. None of that mattered now. The British had their ovens. The British had their justice. Boot steps crunched across frozen ground outside. The women went rigid. Margareta's bladder clenched. She was going to die with the smell of piss on her uniform, just like the soldiers in the aid stations, just like everyone eventually died when the world went to fire and steel. At least it would be quick. Ovens were quick. The boots stopped outside the door. Bärbel made a sound like a wounded animal. Then the door exploded inward. Major Douglas MacLeod filled the doorway, a mountain of Highland wool and military brass, and in his hands, Margaret's brain refused to process it, a turkey. A massive, golden-brown roasted turkey, easily 20 pounds, steam pouring off its crackling skin into the jaille, freezing air. Grease glistened on its surface. The smell hit the barrack like a physical blow. Rosemary, butter, meat, actual meat, real food that wasn't sawdust or floor sweepings or rotted turnips. "Christ's sake!" MacLeod bellowed in mangled German that sounded like he'd learned it from a drunk dictionary. "You daft women! It's Christmas Eve! You come! Mess hall! Now! Eat!" Nobody moved. He thrust the turkey forward like a weapon. Grease dripped onto the floorboards. "Turkey! You understanding? Food! For eating!" Margaret tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't work. The smell was too much, too impossible. Her last memory of roasted meat was 1943, Christmas in Hamburg before the firebombing, before her mother burned alive in the cellar, before food became a theoretical concept instead of something that actually existed. This wasn't real. This was a hallucination. Starvation did this, made you see things, smell things, or it was a trick. A final cruelty before the ovens. Show them food they couldn't have, then... "Move!" MacLeod roared. "Alle! Jetzt! Now!" Frida tried to stand and collapsed. Katharina reached out blindly, grabbing nothing. Bärbel started crying again, high and desperate. Margareta's stomach convulsed. She lurched forward, doubled over, and vomited onto the floor. Thin, yellow bile mixed with threads of blood. Her body was rejecting the mere concept of food. the impossible proximity of that much meat after 2 years of systematic starvation. The smell of turkey mixed with the acid stench of her own sick. MacLeod didn't flinch. "Aye, get it out," he said, switching to English as he stepped into the barrack. "Then get your arses moving. Got 3 more birds in the mess hall, and if they go cold, cook's gonna skin me alive." He set the turkey down on the nearest bunk, casual, like it was nothing, like 20 pounds of roasted meat was something you just left lying around. Steam rose from it in lazy spirals. Margaret wiped her mouth with a shaking hand. Her ears were ringing. 3 more. He said 3 more turkeys. 4 total. For them. On purpose. Not execution? The words came out in broken English, barely audible. MacLeod stared at her like she'd asked if the sky was plaid. "Execution? On Christmas bloody Eve?" He shook his head. "You're prisoners of war, not bloody savages. Now move before the potatoes get cold." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat and something else, cinnamon, maybe, or nutmeg. Smells Margaret hadn't encountered in so long they felt like words from a dead language. The 37 women stared at the turkey. It sat there, being real, being food, grease pooling on the gray wool blanket beneath it. "It's a trap," Frida whispered. "Has to be," someone else agreed. But Margaret was watching steam rise from the bird's skin, watching how the light caught the crispy edges, watching evidence of impossible, abundance just existing 3 feet from her face, the ovens they'd heard all morning, cooking, not burning, cooking actual food. She started laughing, high and broken, teetering on the edge of hysteria, because the British had been roasting Christmas dinner while the German nurses sat in their barrack preparing to die, and the sheer absurdity of it, the cosmic joke of it. "We have to go," Margaret said, forcing the words through her chattering teeth. "We have to see this." Because if this was real, if there was actually a mess hall full of food waiting for them instead of a firing squad, then everything she thought she knew about what came after surrender was wrong. And if she was wrong about that, maybe she was wrong about dying too. The mess hall doors weighed more than Margaret expected. Her hands shook against the wood. Behind her, 36 women waited in the snow, their breath forming clouds that dissolved into darkness. Inside, the room glowed amber. Oil lamps hung from every beam. The smell hit first. Roasted meat, real butter, something sweet she couldn't name. Her stomach clenched so hard she tasted bile. Then she saw them, the stockings, 3 dozen hand-knitted wool stockings pinned to the far wall in a crooked line. Each one bulged with something heavy. Beneath every stocking, a name scrawled in white chalk on dark wood. Margaret Waldheim. The spelling was wrong. The E had vanished, replaced by an I that looked like it had been written by a child. Next to hers, Frida Kellyman, hung where Frida Kellerman's should be. Further down, Barbell Schroeder leaked straw stuffing from a seam. Frida pushed past Margaret and stopped dead. Her hand went to her mouth. "They made these for us?" A Scottish woman in a heavy wool cardigan stepped forward from the corner. Gray hair pulled back severe. Thick hands that had seen decades of work. She pointed at the stockings, then at the women, gesturing with the impatience of someone who didn't speak German but expected to be understood anyway. Mrs. Campbell. Margaret had heard her name from the guards. Her son died at Dunkirk in 1940. 5 years of grief carved into the lines around her eyes. The woman pulled down the stocking labeled Margaret and thrust it at Margaret. It weighed almost nothing. Inside, something shifted. Margaret's fingers found the opening. She pulled out a bar wrapped in purple foil with gold lettering. Cadbury, Dairy Milk Chocolate, 4 ounces. The wrapper crinkled like paper currency. Behind her, someone gasped. Burble had found soap in her stocking, an oval bar of pears, still in its wrapper, amber and translucent. She held it to her nose and made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Frida stood frozen, staring at something small in her palm. A metal tube. Tangy. Natural. Lipstick. The last time Frida Kellerman had owned lipstick was Hamburg, 1943, before the firestorm, before she'd burned everything cosmetic for warmth. During that winter when the fuel rations stopped coming, she'd watched her Bakelite compact melt in a tin can over a candle flame, the rouge and powder bubbling into black tar. Now she held Tangy Natural in her shaking hand and her knees buckled. She hit the floor, still clutching it. The tube rolled away. She crawled after it on her hands and knees, making a noise like an animal caught in wire. When her fingers closed around it again, she brought it to her chest and curled into herself, sobbing so hard her whole body convulsed. Mrs. Campbell watched this without expression. Then she crossed to Margaret and pointed at the chocolate bar. Margaret held it away from her body like it might detonate. Her mind worked through scenarios. Poison. A final cruelty. Feed them sweets laced with something quick, merciful even, better than a firing squad. Mrs. Campbell made an exasperated sound. She grabbed the Cadbury bar from Margaret's hands, tore the wrapper with her teeth, and bit off a corner. Purple foil scattered to the floor. She chewed deliberately, swallowed, and shoved the chocolate back into Margaret's palm. Her fingers closed around Margaret's, forcing them shut around the bar. The old woman's hands were warm. Calloused. Real. Margaret lifted the chocolate to her mouth. The smell hit her nose. Sweet, rich, impossible. She bit down. Sugar exploded across her tongue. Cream. Cocoa. Flavors her body had forgotten existed. Her saliva glands cramped. Her throat closed. She chewed anyway, tears streaming down her face, and swallowed. Then she vomited chocolate onto the mess hall floor. It came up brown and sweet, mixed with the thin gruel they'd been surviving on. She doubled over, hands on her knees, retching while Mrs. Campbell held her shoulders. The old woman's grip was iron. When Margaret could breathe again, Mrs. Campbell pulled a handkerchief from her cardigan pocket and wiped Margaret's mouth. Then she broke off another piece of chocolate and held it out. Margaret took it, ate it slower this time. Her stomach accepted it. Around the room, other nurses were discovering their stockings. Katerina Brandt held the Pear's soap inches from her face, squinting through her broken vision at the lettering. Barbel had unwrapped her chocolate and was eating it in tiny mouse bites, tears running silently down her cheeks. A second Scottish woman appeared carrying a tray. Teacups. Real porcelain, not tin. Steam rising. The woman set the tray on the long wooden table and poured from a ceramic pot. Milk splashed white into dark tea. Margaret watched Frida finally stand, still clutching the lipstick tube. She walked to the nearest lamp, twisted the base, and watched the color emerge. Red. Actual red. Not the pale pink of wartime substitutes or the beetroot stain women had used when there was nothing else. Frida's hand trembled as she brought it to her lips. She painted her mouth in 2 shaking strokes. Then she turned to face the room. The lipstick transformed her, made her look human again instead of gray, made her look like a woman who might have a future instead of just a past. Barbel started laughing. High and thin at first, then deeper. She grabbed her own lipstick from her stocking and painted her mouth too. Then she walked to young Anna Weiss and drew color across her lips with the careful precision of a nurse administering medicine. Within minutes, 12 women had red mouths. They looked at each other and saw something they'd forgotten. The possibility of vanity, of caring what you looked like, of being worth the effort. Mrs. Campbell poured tea and pushed cups toward reaching hands. No one spoke. The Scottish women didn't have German. The German women's English was fractured and sparse. But the tea was hot and sweet, and the chocolate kept appearing from stockings, and the soap smelled like something from a world before war. Margaret held her cup in both hands and felt the warmth seep into her fingers. Mrs. Campbell sat across from her, drinking her own tea, watching with those grief-carved eyes. The old woman reached across the table and patted Margaret's hand once. Quick, almost embarrassed. Then she stood and went to pour more tea for the others. Margaret looked down at the chocolate wrapper in her lap. The purple foil caught lamplight. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. She would keep it for 43 years. The road to Comrie village stretched 3 miles through January fog so thick Margaret couldn't see the guards flanking them. 22 German nurses walked in 2 lines, boots crunching frozen mud. Nobody spoke. Nurse Bärbel Schroeder kept her eyes down, counting steps. 143 since leaving the camp gate. 144. 145. The counting kept her hands from shaking. She'd heard the arguments in the mess hall all week, the Scottish volunteers whispering when they thought the Germans couldn't understand. Dance? With them? Father Reed can preach all he wants. My nephew's buried in France. Christian charity's one thing, Margaret, but this is madness. Bärbel had seen madness. This wasn't it. This was something worse. Hope. The village appeared through the mist like a photograph developing. Stone cottages, a pub with yellow light bleeding from its windows, Comrie Village Hall, its windows blazing, music already thumping through the walls, Glenn Miller. In the mood. Bärbel stopped walking. The guard behind her nearly collided with her back. Keep moving, miss. But she couldn't. That sound, saxophones and trumpets in perfect American chaos, it shouldn't exist. The Reich had banned this music. Degenerate, they'd called it. Jewish corruption of German culture. She'd seen propaganda posters with American musicians drawn as apes. This wasn't ape music. This was joy with a backbeat. Schroeder! Margaretta's voice sharp. Move! Bärbel's legs obeyed. Before her brain caught up. The village hall door opened. Heat and cigarette smoke poured out. Inside, the Scottish band occupied a small stage. Fiddle, accordion, drums, and a trumpet player who couldn't be older than 17. Couples spun across the wooden floor, women in their best dresses, men in suits shiny from wear. Every single person stopped dancing when the German nurses entered. The trumpet player's note died mid-phrase. The drummer's sticks froze. Silence spread like spilled water. Bärbel felt 50 pairs of eyes drilling into her skull. She recognized that look. The same look German civilians gave Jewish prisoners being marched through town. Hate, mixed with shame, mixed with the desperate need to look away, but the inability to stop staring. A woman near the punch bowl set down her cup carefully. Too carefully. Like she was stopping herself from throwing it. Father Angus Reed appeared from somewhere, his priest's collar stark white against black wool. He walked to the center of the floor, turned to face the villagers, and raised both hands. Now then, his voice carried despite its softness. We discussed this. Christian charity doesn't stop being Christian just because it's inconvenient. My husband's buried in North Africa. A woman's voice from the back. Aye, Moira, and mine's in a German grave. Mrs. Flora Drummond stood from her chair along the wall, 60-something, spine like an iron rod. Which is why I'll be asking one of these lasses to teach me the Viennese waltz. Been wanting to learn for 40 years. The room held its breath. Mrs. Drummond walked straight to Frida Kellerman and extended her hand. Well, can you dance it or not? Frida looked at Margaret. Margaret gave the tiniest nod. Yes, I can dance. The band started again, slower this time, a waltz. Mrs. Drummond and Frida moved across the floor in careful, formal circles. 2 more Scottish women stood, then a third. The mechanic appeared at Bärbel's elbow. She'd noticed him when they entered, hard to miss someone who walked with a pronounced limp in a room full of healthy dancers. Mid-20s, dark hair, grease under his fingernails despite obvious scrubbing. He was holding 2 cups of punch. Möchten Sie? He massacred the German pronunciation. Foot movement. Together? Bärbel stared at him. Your German is terrible. Aye. He grinned. Your English better? No? Grand. We'll figure it out. He set down both cups and offered his hand. She took it. His palm was warm and calloused. He led her onto the floor with the confidence of someone who'd clearly never taken a dance lesson in his life. The band switched to Pennsylvania 6 to 5000. Fast, frantic, utterly American. They were terrible together. He stepped on her foot in the first 5 seconds. She stumbled over his limp in the first 10. They moved like two people who'd learned different dances in different languages and were trying to meet somewhere in the middle. Burble laughed. The sound surprised her, burst out like something that had been locked behind her ribs for years. The mechanic laughed too, and suddenly they were both laughing, breathless and ridiculous, while around them German nurses and Scottish villagers attempted the same impossible translation. "Hamish," the mechanic said, pointing at himself. "Burble." "Barbara." Close enough. They danced 3 more songs. His limp meant he couldn't spin her, so he improvised. Gentle turns, small steps, movements that worked within his limitations. She realized halfway through Chattanooga Choo Choo that he'd probably practiced this, figured out how to dance despite his leg. At 11:30, the band took a break. Hamish gestured toward the door. "Air?" Burble nodded. Outside, behind the parish hall, January cold hit like a slap. Barble's breath misted. She could hear the band inside starting up again, something slower this time. "You're a good dancer," Hamish said. His English was easier when they weren't shouting over music. "You're a terrible dancer," Burble replied. Then, softer, but kind. "Kind's free." He pulled out a pack of cigarettes, offered her one. She shook her head. He lit his own, the match flare briefly illuminating his face. "Why'd you come? To Scotland, I mean. Could have stayed in Germany." "No future there." The words came easier than she expected. "Nothing left. My family, my city." She made a gesture like an explosion. "Dusseldorf. All gone. I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry." Burble wrapped her arms around herself. "Sorry doesn't rebuild buildings." Hamish took a drag, exhaled slowly. "I wanted to fight. They wouldn't take me. Polio when I was 6. He tapped his bad leg. "So I fixed trucks instead. Fixed them so other men could go die in the places I'd never see." "You think fixing trucks is shameful?" "I think—" He stopped. Started again. "I think we're all just trying to survive what we didn't choose." Burble looked at him. Really looked. Saw someone who understood that survival wasn't heroic. It was just what you did when dying wasn't an option. She kissed him. Quick, graceless, her lips cold against his warm ones. He tasted like tobacco and punch. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide. "Sorry," she said. "Not sorry at all. Don't be." Hamish's hand found hers in the dark. "Barbara, Burble, would you maybe want to—" "Yes." She didn't let him finish the question. Whatever he was offering, more dances, more conversations, more of this impossible tenderness from a stranger who fixed trucks while his country bled. Yes. Inside, the band played In the Mood again. The degenerate music that should have been forbidden but sounded like freedom. Burble Schroeder decided in that moment, behind a Scottish parish hall with a mechanic's hand in hers, that she would refuse repatriation. Germany was ash and memory. Scotland had Glenn Miller and a man who'd learned to dance despite his limitations. She would stay. She would build something new. 6 months later, she would marry him. But tonight, she just held his hand and listened to American jazz bleed through stone walls, feeling her future shift like tectonic plates settling into place. The optometrist's shop in Perth smelled like leather and wood polish. Katharina Brandt sat rigid in the examination chair, her hands gripping the armrests until her knuckles went white. She hadn't told anyone about the headaches. 3 years of them, constant, like her skull was slowly cracking open from the inside. Dr. Sinclair stood beside the optometrist, a rail-thin man named Mr. Fraser, who kept making small sympathetic sounds as he examined her eyes. Katharina stared at the blur of his face, seeing only shapes and shadows. She'd memorized the camp infirmary by counting steps, 12 from the medicine cabinet to the door, 8 from the examination table to the sink. She worked by touch and sound, pretending she could see the medical charts she held upside down. "When did you last have proper glasses?" Fraser's voice was gentle. 44. Magdeburg. The bombing. Katharina kept her German accent flat, gave nothing away, She'd learned to survive by being invisible. Fraser made another sympathetic noise. Dr. Sinclair shifted his weight, his officer's boots creaking on the wooden floor. 20 minutes of lens testing. The letters on the wall remained soup. Fraser worked through his case of trial lenses, slipping them into the frame one by one, and each time Katerina shook her head. The shapes refused to sharpen. Her chest tightened with each failure. Then Fraser clicked a new lens into place. The letters snapped into focus so suddenly, Katerina gasped. Capital E at the top of the chart. Below it, F and P. She could read them. After 18 months of gray blur, she could actually read. "That's the one," Fraser said quietly. Katerina couldn't speak. The exam room crystallized around her. Wood paneling she'd thought was wallpaper, Fraser's face lined with age she hadn't known was there, Dr. Sinclair watching her with an expression she couldn't name. She saw dust motes floating in the afternoon light, actual individual particles of dust. The tears came fast. Silent. Fraser stepped away to prepare the prescription. Dr. Sinclair remained, his hands clasped behind his back in that way British officers had. Katerina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, ashamed. 12 pounds, Fraser called from the back room. "For the wireframes and lenses both. Ready in an hour." 12 pounds. Katerina's stomach dropped. She earned nothing as a prisoner. She owned nothing except the camp-issued clothes on her back and one photograph of her mother, creased from being carried in her pocket since Hamburg burned. "I cannot—" She started in English. Dr. Sinclair pulled out his wallet, counted out bills without looking at her, laid them on Fraser's counter like it meant nothing, like he bought glasses for German war criminals every Tuesday. The room tilted. Katerina gripped the examination chair. "I cannot accept," she whispered. "You can, and you will." Dr. Sinclair's voice had the same firm quality he used when ordering patients to take their medicine. "You're no use to me in the infirmary if you can't read a thermometer." An hour later, Fraser handed her a small cardboard case. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, wireframe glasses that weighed almost nothing. Katerina's hands shook as she unfolded them, settled them on her nose. The world exploded into clarity. She saw Perth through the shop window. Cobblestones she'd thought were smooth pavement. Individual bricks in the buildings across the street. A woman pushing a pram with a blue blanket inside it. Blue. She could see the color blue. Trees had separate leaves. Signs had readable letters. She turned to Dr. Sinclair and the words came out before she could stop them. "Helped them." Her voice cracked. "At Ravensbrück. I assisted in medical experiments. I am not innocent." The shop went silent. Fraser, wrapping something behind the counter, froze. Dr. Sinclair's face didn't change. He didn't step back. He didn't recoil. Katerina kept talking, the confession pouring out like blood from a wound. "I held them down. The prisoners. For the infections trials. For the bone grafts. I told myself I was just assisting. That I was following orders, but I knew. I knew what we were doing, and I did it anyway because they would have sent me to the front if I refused." She grabbed Dr. Sinclair's hand without thinking, desperate for him to understand the weight of it. "I am not someone you should help. I do not deserve these glasses. I do not deserve—" "I know." Dr. Sinclair's voice was quiet. "Your file came through last month. War Crimes Commission forwarded it. I've read everything." Katerina's vision blurred again, but not from her eyes. He knew. He'd known when he drove her 40 miles. When he laid down 12 pounds of his own money. When he stood here letting her see clearly for the first time in years. She tried to take off the glasses. Her hands wouldn't cooperate, shaking too hard to grip the frames. Dr. Sinclair caught her wrists. Gentle. Firm. "You're still getting the glasses." He released her, stepped back. "What you do with the clarity is your business, but you'll do it seeing properly." Katerina stood in Fraser's shop, her hands empty, the glasses still on her face. Through the window she could see a church across the street, its steeple sharp against the February sky. She could read the time on the clock tower, 3:15. She could see the numbers. Fraser cleared his throat, handed Dr. Sinclair a receipt. The doctor folded it into his pocket without looking at it. "We should return before supper," he said, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just refused to let a war criminal give back an act of grace. The drive back to camp took an hour. Katerina stared out the window the entire time, watching Scotland materialize in details she'd forgotten existed. Telephone wires, individual fence posts, a hawk circling over a field, its wings spread so wide she could count the feathers. At the camp gates, Dr. Sinclair killed the engine. "Report to the infirmary at 0800 tomorrow," he said. "There's a new shipment of medical texts from Edinburgh. I'll need you to catalog them." Reading. He was asking her to read. Katerina nodded, not trusting her voice. She climbed out of the car, walked toward the women's barracks with her new glasses still on her face. Behind her, Dr. Sinclair's engine started again, fading toward the officers' quarters. That night, Margaret found her sitting on her bunk, the glasses in her lap. "You can see?" Margaret asked. "Yes? And?" Katerina put the glasses back on, looked at Margaret's face, really looked. The lines around her eyes, the gray threading through her dark hair, the scar on her chin from some forgotten injury. A whole person, not just a blur. "And I still don't deserve them," Katerina said quietly. Margaret sat beside her, said nothing, just sat there until lights out, two women who'd survived things that shouldn't be survived, watching the darkness come with eyes that could finally see it clearly. Katerina wore those glasses every day for the next 43 years. July 19, 1947. Comrie Village Hall. The same wooden floorboards where Bärbel first kissed Hamish 18 months ago. 12 German women stand in a line facing Magistrate William Henderson. They're wearing borrowed dresses from the Women's Voluntary Service, floral prints that don't quite fit, hemlines uneven but clean, pressed, respectable. Margaret's hands won't stop shaking. The hall is packed, every chair filled. The same Scottish villagers who whispered behind their backs at the market. The same pub regulars who spat on the ground when the German nurses walked past. The same church ladies who clutched their purses tighter. But also Mrs. Campbell, Father Reed, Dr. Sinclair in his army dress uniform, Hamish McTavish standing beside Bärbel, his hand gripping hers so tight her fingers are white. The magistrate clears his throat, opens the ledger. Bärbel McTavish, née Schroeder. Bärbel steps forward. She's gained 20 pounds since Christmas 1945. Her cheeks have color now. She recites the oath in accented English, steady and clear, and Hamish's face crumples when she finishes. The magistrate stamps her papers. Official. Frida goes next. Then Anna Weiss. Then Katerina, her wire-frame glasses catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Margaret is last. She approaches the magistrate's table and her vision blurs. The words on the paper swim. She opens her mouth but nothing comes out. King George VI. She's supposed to pledge loyalty to the man whose bombers incinerated Hamburg, whose soldiers occupied Germany, whose country imprisoned her in a camp where she expected to die. Her throat closes. Mrs. Campbell rises from the third row. The entire hall goes silent. The old woman walks to the front. Her black dress is the same one she wore to her son's memorial service in 1940. Everyone knows it. She stands beside Margaret and takes her hand, the same way she did that first night with the chocolate bar. "Go on, lass," Mrs. Campbell says quietly. "It's just words." Margaret's voice cracks. "I, Margaret Waldheim, do solemnly swear." She chokes, tears streaming now, hot and fast. Mrs. Campbell's grip tightens. "My William would have wanted this." Louder now, loud enough for the back row. "He'd have wanted you here, making your stolen, living your life." Someone in the crowd gasps. Margaret tries again. "That I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King George VI." Her voice breaks completely. She's sobbing, the words barely intelligible. "His heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God." The magistrate stamps her papers before she can collapse. The hall erupts. Half the room is applauding. The other half is crying. Old men with war medals pinned to their jackets are wiping their eyes. The village priest is gripping the back of a chair, his shoulders shaking. Someone, Margaret can't see who through her tears, starts the gramophone in the corner. Glenn Miller. Chattanooga Choo Choo. The same American swing that played at the Epiphany dance. The same degenerate music that Burble heard for the first time and couldn't believe was real. Hamish pulls Burble onto the floor. They dance in the exact spot where they first stepped on each other's feet. He dips her, and she laughs. That same shocked laugh from 18 months ago, like she still can't believe any of this is happening. Frida dances with Mrs. Drummond, the widow who taught her the Viennese waltz. Katerina stands to the side, watching through her glasses, actually seeing the joy this time instead of navigating by blurred shadows. Dr. Sinclair appears beside her. "You staying, then?" Katerina nods. "Glasgow General offered me a position. Surgical ward. They know? I told them. They hired me anyway." Sinclair doesn't smile, just nods once. "Good." Margaret is still standing at the magistrate's table, Mrs. Campbell's hand in hers when the old woman speaks again. "I hated you, you know, when you first arrived. I wanted them to send you all back, let you starve in the rubble." Margaret meets her eyes. "I would have done the same." "Aye." Mrs. Campbell's voice is hoarse, but William was a soft lad, always feeding stray cats, giving his jacket to beggars. He'd have brought you all home for Christmas dinner himself, if he could have. She pulls something from her pocket. A photograph, creased and faded. A young man in RAF uniform, grinning at the camera. He never made it off the beach. At Dunkirk, 22 years old. Mrs. Campbell presses the photo into Margaret's hand. "But he'd have liked your stolen. He had a terrible sweet tooth." Margaret can't speak. She just holds the photograph. This dead boy who never knew her, who she never killed, who somehow made space for her anyway. The music swells. More couples on the floor now. Even the magistrate is clapping along. Margaret tucks the photograph into her dress pocket, right next to the purple Cadbury wrapper she's carried for 19 months. She'll keep both for the rest of her life. By nightfall, the party spills into the street. Someone wheels out barrels of beer. Hamish and 3 other men start an impromptu football match using a bundled jacket as the ball. Burble cheers from the sidelines, her new Scottish accent already creeping into her German. Margaret walks back to her room above the bakery she opened 6 months ago. The hand-knitted stocking from Christmas 1945 hangs on the wall. Margaret, still misspelled in faded chalk. She touches it once, then starts measuring flour for tomorrow's batch. 3 loaves of stollen, 2 dozen shortbread, a batch of oat cakes for Mrs. Haas Campbell, who always buys extra on Saturdays. Outside, laughter echoes through Comrie's narrow streets. German accents mixing with Scottish burrs. Glenn Miller still playing from somebody's gramophone. Margaret kneads the dough, her hands steady now, and thinks about the ovens that once terrified her. The same ovens where she now bakes bread that the village queues up to buy every morning. In 2019, Margaret's granddaughter will run this same bakery. The stocking will still hang on the wall. Tourists will ask about it and she'll tell them the story. How her grandmother came to Scotland expecting execution and got Christmas dinner instead. How 37 women walked into a camp as enemies and some walked out as neighbors. How sometimes mercy is just a roasted turkey and a tube of lipstick and a hand that refuses to let go.